Good morning to you once again. Thank you so much for joining us today. Is another one of the Morning Live special broadcasts where we're debating a topic that's very controversial at the moment, violence in South Africa. Why is it that we tend to perhaps lean towards violence in our protests and the way we express our frustrations over the education system or whatever it may be? Why are we so violent? Now, Leanne is away from Studio 10, where Morning Live usually broadcasts. She's in Studio 12, and that's where she'll be tackling this issue. Leanne, it's over to you. Good morning.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Violence is now under the spotlight here on Morning Live. South Africa has been described by iconic Graca Machel as an angry nation on the brink. Our pent-up aggression appears to violently rear its ugly head in instances of rebellion, vicious demonstrations, incidents of crime, and even public defamatory remarks, causing us to hold a mirror to ourselves in self-reflection. Are we really a violent people? Well, today we have set aside the entire show to discuss this further. Now, joining us on the panel this morning, we've got a Wits University lecturer focusing in on violence, is Dr Malose Langa. Thank you very much for being with us here. Also, Statistician General, South Africa's very own Statistician General, Pali Lehohla. Thank you very much for joining us, and you're in our Pretoria studio, so welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
And from the CSVR's, the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation, we've got with us the Executive Director Nomfundo Mogapi. It's good to have you as well. Thank you very, very much. It's such a major discussion that we need to have, and it really is, and there's so many directions to turn in. But I suppose let's ask with the most simple question, the question we're asking South Africans. Nomfundo, is South Africa a violent society?
Leanne, our concern as SABC, we've constantly been talking about the culture of violence that exists in South Africa. But what we're finding now is that violence is not just becoming a culture or a problem-solving mechanism, it's becoming our language. It's the language that people use to be heard, but also, interestingly, what's happening is also the language that the people in power are using to hear people. People are saying to us, we feel that the only way we can be heard is if we are violent. And our other concern is that the nature of the violence is becoming much more violent and aggressive and gratuitous. And what we're also finding is becoming more organized, which is a concern for us. There are people that we call political entrepreneurs, economic entrepreneurs, and now even religious entrepreneurs are taking advantage of the situation and are becoming more organized. So these are the things that we need to look at. But finally, Leanne, is that what's important for us is not just the question whether we're violent or not, but it's how do we analyze and respond to violence, because our response also fuels the problem. So we need to look at the perpetuating factors that fuel the violence. We need to look at the precipitating factors that trigger the violence, and finally the root causes that requires longer term intervention. And as we discussed, we could unpack some of these issues a bit more.
We certainly will. We'll try and get into all of those issues and try and do the full spectrum at the end of it. But I think to start off this discussion, that question I'm really asking is, in your opinion, are we a violent society?
I mean, when you look at the statistics, you can tell. I mean, the crime statistics from 2013, when you look at the 2014, I mean, there's an increase with all kinds of crimes. And I guess for me, that's a clear indication that we are becoming like a violent, in a society.
Okay, so the reality is we're on. Now let's talk to the Statistician General. He's the man with the numbers. He's the man who looks at all of this. Pali, let's talk about statistics. And I suppose that's one way of measuring violence and crime is by researching it. You've done research, you look at these things. From the research that you've done and the perception of crime in South Africa, are we a violent society? Is that what the figures are showing?
Well, indeed, we are, in terms of the numbers, a violent society. And you can look at this violence from many perspectives. The clear number is about the number of people that get killed. That's about 10 in 100,000. That's twice the number of people that get killed in the United States. It's 10 times that get killed in Japan. If you look at road carnage, which is another sign of violence, we get similar numbers, which is 10 in 100,000. So all these, and the police do say that part of the road carnage is the human factor, the behavior, the drinking, and so on.
Yeah.
So we are indeed a violent society.
Yeah.
In terms of perceptions from the public, 65% of the public are actually scared of housebreaking, whereas 41% are more worried about home robbery. And of course, if you look at the crime statistics, victims of crime, where women are victims, there is a very clear fear of walking in the parks. 65% of the public feel that they cannot walk safely on the parks. The Chapter 12 of the National Development Plan recognizes that there is need for safer communities, and recommends a few steps around this. It recognizes that crime is a major issue in South Africa.
Yeah, it's amazing. It never normally happens that within the first question of a discussion, the topic is answered by the first question, are we a violent society? The question, the answer to that question is yes. South Africa is a violent society. But that doesn't solve anything, does it? So I think what we need to do with this discussion is get to the bottom of why we are a violent society and what we can do about it and what are some of the solutions. So I think if we can all agree that at the moment we are living in a violent society, I suppose we'll all be on the same page, and from there we can take the conversation forward. Let's get to the bottom of it. What do you believe is fueling this aggression, this violence, still in this day and age?
And to answer that, Leanne, we have to, as I said, to look at it from these three different levels. So we know that there are the root causes that drive the violence. And in the way in which we react to it as South Africa, usually we don't create clear linkages between these issues and violence. So there's issues such as inequality. There's been research to show that there's linkages. Socioeconomic exclusion, issues of our unresolved past, our unresolved collective trauma, which was very violent, and those representation of that past, patriarchy, all these structural issues, which require longer-term interventions that is multidisciplinary. Then we have the precipitating factors that require more medium-term interventions, and those range from lack of the functioning of institutions in South Africa, the state institutions that are supposed to just meet people's basic needs, the breakdown of trust between those institutions, people feeling that their basic needs are not met, the breakdown between the criminal justice system, the breakdown of the family institution, which is really key in driving these issues, the dehumanization, the sense of I'm worthless, I don't worth anything that people experience in their family environment, but also in terms of the structural violence and how they get treated. And then finally, the perpetuating factors that fuel this. And this has to do with how we, once the violence take place, actually continue to perpetuate it. The way leaders, the utterances that some of our leaders make, that because the root causes and the precipitating factors have created a group of really angry young people who are ready. They are militant ready. If you just say something like foreigners must go back home, they are ready to step in and become violent. The tendency of the people in power and leaders, when the violence happens, we tend to only listen to the political entrepreneurs who take advantage of the violence and the criminal elements, but not to the people behind the entrepreneurs. And we are not listening to the genuine needs of the people. Our approach is bring more police, become more violent, and that falls again into the violence. So basically, we need to look at it from all those different levels. And our tendency, we get only pulled into the perpetuating factors, the fueling factors. We get excited, and Malose might talk a bit more about the moral panic, because we just deal with that. But after that, we move on and we don't deal with the long-term causes. So the violence keep on erupting all the time. Wherever
you look, it happens. Let's talk news. Let's talk about what's happening now. I mean, you're at a university. It's not necessarily happening at Wits University, but we're seeing almost like a cauldron bubbling over now in South Africa with the images of statues, and the statues are at the center of it. That's not necessarily the issue at play here. It's a bigger issue. It's a much bigger issue, and perhaps we need to get to the bottom of what these issues are. But it's that anger within South Africans as well. Perhaps we need to deal with. What are your views? What do you take on this?
I mean, Leanne, there's no way we can talk about violent crime or violence like in South Africa without making any reference to the history of violence like in South Africa. I mean, obviously, the foundation of our country has been built like on a violent, colonial sort of like project, which has resulted into so many effects. I mean, we're such a traumatized nation. So obviously, when you look at the issue of statues, I mean, it gives us an opportunity, for us as a nation to get into a real dialogue. Because if you only focus on the symbols, we're going to miss a lot of what are the real drivers for young university students to be raising genuine sort of issues. Because when you look at what has happened at UCT, fundamentally the issue is about transformation. The issue is about issues of equity, it's about issues of access, it's about issues of fairness, it's about issues of basically, can we get to a point where we are all treated as equal, human beings, in South Africa? And of course, I think what is very encouraging about what is happening at UCT is that the students have not, so far, have not resorted to sort of violent means.
Yeah.
They've been very peaceful, but in some incidents, especially with what happened in Pretoria yesterday, where now we have two groups where some people are saying we need to keep the statues, but they're not open to why we need to be discussing, what does this statue mean, for me, and where potentially, if we do not manage this process very well, it can result into some violence between two groups. Because already you have EFF saying the statues must be removed. You have other groups saying the statues must sort of remain, but they're not open a real dialogue around why other groups feel the statues must be removed.
All right, so we're going to continue this discussion and we're going to take a very quick break. Pali, when we come back, the question I'm going to ask you is, we obviously are still healing the wounds from the past, and previously crimes were very much so based on color lines. But having a look at statistics now, we'd love to know how that shift has happened, and is color playing a role at all in this country, or does crime know absolutely no boundaries? Let's take a break, and that's what we'll discuss after this. Stay tuned.